Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's virtual Sunday school session, our 11th online session, I believe. This week, like last week, we're going to be reading a poem again, two poems actually. The poems are from a book by Jacqueline Woodson. It's called Brown Girl Dreaming. Can you see that in the light there? There we are. Wonderful book. And what it is, it's a memoir. So it's the story of her life. She tells the story of her life growing up. She was born in Ohio, but then she spent a lot of time in the South. And she grew up in the 1960s during the Civil Rights era. And she tells the stories about her life through poetry. Now, it might not sound like poetry to you because it's free verse, so it doesn't necessarily rhyme and it doesn't have the standard meter of the poem, but it's very beautiful. And we're going to read the first two poems in her book, and then we're going to talk about an incident that happened to her. So, poem number 1. I am born. February 12, 1963. I am born on a Tuesday at University Hospital, Columbus, Ohio, USA, a country caught between black and white. I am born not long from the time, or far from the place, where my great-great-grandparents worked the deep, rich land, unfree, dawn till dusk, unpaid, drank cool water from scooped-out gourds, looked up, and followed the sky's mirrored constellations to freedom. I am born as the South explodes, too many people, too many years, enslaved and emancipated, but not free. The people who look like me keep fighting and marching and getting killed, so that today, February 12th, 1963, and every day from this moment on, brown children like me can grow up free, can grow up learning and voting and walking and riding wherever we want. I am born in Ohio, but the stories of South Carolina already run like rivers through my veins. So that is the first poem. So 1963 was when she was born, almost 60 years ago, a long time ago. Although really, in some ways, it's really not that long ago. And it was during the Civil Rights era. So this was a time when lots of people were fighting for the right for everyone to be treated fairly, no matter what the color of their skin or no matter how they were different from other people. And so all that was happening while she was born. Now she talks about born not long from the time or place where her great-great-grandparents worked deep, rich land, unfree, unpaid, dawn till dusk. So what she was talking about there, she was talking about slavery, right? So her great-great-grandparents were slaves and looked up and followed the sky's mirrored constellation to freedom. They could only dream about freedom, looking up into the sky. And then she talks about, she's born as the South explodes. Too many people enslaved and emancipated, but not free. So once they were emancipated from slavery, these former slaves, they still weren't free in a sense because they still weren't treated, they were still treated by many as slaves, and they were still treated by others just based on the color of their skin and not given the same rights of other people. The same rights as other people because of the color of skin. But they kept fighting and marching and getting killed and working to have that freedom. So that's what the Civil Rights era was about. So that today, and every day from this moment on, brown children like me can grow up free, can grow up learning and voting and walking and riding wherever we want. So do you think that, well, I'll save that question later. I'll go on to the second poem. The second poem is Second Daughter's Second Day on Earth. My birth certificate says female Negro. Mother, Mary Ann Irby, 22, Negro. Father, Jack Austin Woodson, 25, Negro. In Birmingham, Alabama, Martin Luther King Jr. is planning a march on Washington where John F. Kennedy is president. In Harlem, Malcolm X is standing on a soapbox talking about a revolution. In Montgomery, only 7 years have passed since Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a city bus. I am born brown-skinned, black-haired, and wide-eyed. I am born Negro here and colored there, and somewhere else the freedom singers have linked arms, their protest rising into song. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. And somewhere else, James Baldwin is writing about injustice, each novel, each essay changing the world. Not even 3 years have passed since a brown girl named Ruby Bridges walked into an all-white school. Armed guards surrounded her while hundreds of white people spat and called her names. She was only 6 years old. I do not know if I'll be strong like Ruby. I do not know what the world will look like when I'm finally able to walk, speak, write. My fingers curl into fists automatically. I do not know if these hands will become Malcolm's, raised and fisted, or Martin's, open and asking, or James, curled around a pen. I do not know if these hands will be Rosa's or Ruby's, gently gloved and fiercely folded calmly on the lap, on a desk, around a book, ready to change the world. So that is the second poem. And in it, you might have heard many names of people from history that you've heard about in school before: Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks. Sure, most of you know who these people are. James Baldwin, an author that wrote about injustice. Ruby Bridges, a 6-year-old that was the first brown child to walk into a formerly segregated school. So she's talking about all these people and all of these different people during the civil rights era that in their own way worked too hard to change things. And they all had different ways of doing it. She talks about Martin Luther King, open and asking questions, asking things, asking people to be better people. Malcolm X, who took a different approach. Jacqueline talks about Malcolm's raised and fisted approach, or James Baldwin approach. His approach was through writing and through books. Or Rosa Parks' approach was just stillness and refusing to give in. Or Ruby, the braveness of that 6-year-old girl walking into the school and just sitting at a desk. So all these different ways that these people had an impact in the world. That's what she's talking about in this essay. And in reference to her birth and being a baby, with the clenched fist that babies have, wondering what will be her approach in life? How will she help the world? So that was almost 60 years ago in 1963 that was born. So I'm going to ask you a question that I want you to think about as we move on through the lesson, and we will come back to it at the end of the lesson. And the question is, has how we treat people who are different from ourselves changed since that day that Jacqueline was born in 1963 and during that time of the civil rights era? Has it changed for the better, for the worse, or maybe some of both? But think about that. There was a lot of people fighting hard, fighting against injustice and fighting for people who are different to be treated fairly, or people who just look different, and specifically people with brown or black skin. And have things gotten better since then? So think about that, and we'll come back to it later. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is an incident that happened to the author of this book, Jacqueline Woodson. So she won an award for this book, and at the awards event, there was the man that was up on stage presenting the award was a friend of hers. And when he introduced her, here's what he said. He said to the audience, "Jackie's allergic to watermelon," he said. "Just let that sink into your mind." Now, according to stereotypes, Black people love watermelon. And the simple fruit, a watermelon, became a symbol of Black people being lazy and not smart. So what is a stereotype for you younger folks? So a stereotype is an untrue idea or belief that people have about a different group of people based upon how they look on the outside. And here is Jacqueline's friend on stage in front of this huge audience saying that it was weird she didn't like watermelon because, you know, she's a person of color, so of course she should like watermelon. So I think I will, to better describe it, I will read Jacqueline's words herself a while after the event and how she described it and how it impacted her. So she says, I was a brown girl growing up in the United States. But at that point in my life, I had seen the racist representations associated with African Americans and watermelon, heard the terrifying stories of Black men being lynched with watermelons hanging around them, watched Black migrants from the South try to eke out a living in the big city by driving through neighborhoods like my own with truckloads of the fruit. In a book I found in a library, a camp song about a watermelon vine was illustrated with caricatures of sleepy-looking Black people sitting by trees, greeting and eating watermelon. Slowly, the hideousness or the horribleness of the stereotype began to sink in the eyes of those who told and repeated the jokes. We, so brown and Black people, were shuffling, googly-eyed, and lesser than. So there's this stereotype about watermelons being associated with Black people, and this association that somehow, as in Jacqueline's words, that Black people are lesser than, they're lesser than white people. So getting back into her words, she says, I could no longer eat watermelons after learning about this. I was becoming a writer, and what I wanted to put on the page were the stories of people who looked like me. I was a child on a mission to change the face of literature and erase stereotypes forever. By the time I was 45, I had won just about every award one could win for young person's literature. Just this month, I received the National Book Award in the Young Adult category for my memoir, Brown Girl Dreaming, the book we were just reading from. As I walked away from the stage to a standing ovation after my acceptance speech, it was the last place in the world I thought I'd hear the watermelon joke, directed by my friend at me. Jackie's allergic to watermelon, he said. Just let that sink in your mind. We had been friends for years. Last summer at his home, he served watermelon soup, and I told him I was allergic to the fruit. I was astonished when he brought this up before the National Book Award audience in the form of a joke about being Black. In a few short words, the audience and I were asked to take a step back from everything I'd ever written, a step back from the power and the meaning of this award. By making light of that deep and troubled history, he showed that he believed that we were at a point where we could laugh about it all. His historical context, different from mine, came from a place of ignorance. So in his comments about watermelon, he thought he was making a joke, but to his friend, it was something that was deeply hurtful because it played upon this stereotype. So he has since apologized, and I like to think that he has learned from his mistake. So I am going to bring up an image for you. So this image that I'm showing you is called a pyramid of hate. Now, how does any pyramid work? Think about how high they reach into the sky. How do they manage that, to build them so tall? Well, the base of the pyramid is what provides support for the next level, which is a little bit smaller. And then that is able to provide support for the level after that. And these levels build up to support the very top of the pyramid. So that base of the pyramid is really important because it will provide support for all the rest of the layers of the pyramid. So to come back to that question I asked you in the beginning about, do you think that since the 1960s and the civil rights era, that we treat people who look differently from us more fairly than we used to? Now, my own opinion, I think we've made some progress as a society, or at least I like to think we have, in that, you know, outwardly at least, we don't have segregated schools. And there's a lot that's improved, but a lot of people's attitudes about how they feel about people who look a little different from them, that have different colored skin, or that different in any other ways, many other ways, a lot of that still hasn't changed. So I think it's yes and no. I think some things have improved and some things haven't. We have a long ways to go. But I ask myself, how is that possible? How can people still have those attitudes that, oh, their eyes look different than mine, so they must be lesser than me. How can people still have those attitudes? And how does the hate, the more extreme, the violence that happens to some of these people, how is that still happening? And I think this pyramid does a good job is one way of looking at that and explaining it. So basically how it works is that it starts with, you have at the top, you have really, really horrible thing of genocide, which is deliberately and trying to entirely get rid of a certain group of people. And then you have right below that violence that's based on people's biases. And then there's discrimination based on how people look. So maybe someone isn't given a certain job because they're from a certain place or their skin is a certain color. And then below that, there's acts of biases. So this is bullying, ridicule, calling people's names, and telling jokes about people because they look different. And then there's and then at the bottom, there is, this is the biggest level of the pyramid, biased attitudes. So this involves believing in stereotypes. This involves just fear of differences and fear of those who are different from us, using language that's non-inclusive. And this bottom layer, it's very subtle. But the idea of this pyramid is that all these people, there's a lot of us, and I probably do some of these things in this bottom level too, without always being aware of it. There's a lot of people in this bottom category. The problem is, and the way this pyramid works, is that it's these biased attitudes that support the acts of bias. So it's these biased attitudes that support Jacqueline's friend telling that joke, right? About watermelon that so hurt her friend. But then it's the things like telling jokes like that supports the actual discrimination and people not getting hired for jobs because of how they look. And that in turn supports violence against various groups of people. So that's how this works. But the good news is, because it's a pyramid, if this bottom layer gets small, it won't support the level above it. So that's good, because we have the power to change the upper levels of the pyramid, like acts of violence, by making the bottom layer of the pyramid smaller. And we all can do that in ourselves and in those around us. So that is what you personally can do to help topple this pyramid. So how do you do that? It's by being aware. It's being aware of how you treat others, the things you say, and of how your friends and people around you treat other people and the things they say to them. So have you ever not wanted to play with someone because maybe they looked a little different with you, maybe they wore glasses, or maybe they just wore really strange clothes, or their family was from some foreign country, or they were just different in some way, and so maybe you just didn't feel comfortable around them. So think about like that, if there's been times in your own life that's been the situation. And let's say there was a kid that moved here from another country, they didn't speak English very well, so you didn't feel comfortable around them. So it was fear, and that would be the fear of difference that's in this bottom category of the pyramid. So maybe what you could have done
And they were probably scared too. They were scared because they were in a totally new place. So you could go up to them, introduce yourself, say hi. So that's a way you could have acted different. And you know what? None of us are perfect. We're always learning about ourselves. And so that's why I say it's good to be aware. So think about how you interact with these people. And just that small interaction with, for example, this kid that was from another country, that could have really helped them. And that might help you change your own attitudes. And if you can think of a situation where you did the opposite of that and didn't treat someone so well because of some kind of a difference, think about that and think about what you could have done differently. And then you can do better next time. And that's the important part, is that you learn and that you're aware of your actions. To help topple this pyramid, just be aware of your own words and your own actions and those of others. And then if we can lessen the bottom of the pyramid, the top will topple over as well.
So that is it for today's lesson. I do encourage you to check this book out. It is at the Southwest Harbor Library, except that's this one, so it's not there right now, but it will be again. And if anyone wants that copy from the library, I'll let you know when I'm done with it. I do want to read through the whole thing. I haven't finished it yet. And it's also at the Jessup Library in Bar Harbor. I'm not sure what their open status is. I know Southwest is doing curbside pickup. Of course, it's online. It is indicated that it's for children ages 10 and up. So if you're younger than that, you might want to talk to your parents and see if they think it's appropriate for you. Or maybe you could read it together with them. So it's a wonderful book though, and it's worth checking out. So I hope you do that. And that is it for this week. Until next time, be kind, stay safe, and be well.